Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new edition of Swift Heroes. I'm very excited to be here today and have the chance to start this amazing experience by presenting the very first talk of this edition in today's warm-up. Today, we're going to talk about something that's crucial to any developer. Try to keep things as modular as possible. So this to speed up the development process with Cecilia Castillo who is a mobile engineer at PayPal. So welcome, Cecilia. Hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hey, nice to talk to you. Yeah, happy to be here.
Welcome. I'm actually very glad to have met you before, and you're such an amazing person, and I'm actually looking forward to hear what you have to say here. And love the topic, and welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this forum. Okay, so let's get started. Um, Let me just start with my slides. Sorry. Yeah. So, as Mario mentioned, I'm Cecilia Castillo. I'm currently a mobile engineer at PayPal. And more specifically, I've been working at Zoom for quite some time. I've been working at this company for around 8 years. So, what I wanted to share with you was our journey into frameworks and how that has helped us to scale and speed development. Um, For that, I want to start with a simple question like, what is a modular mobile architecture? Why do we actually need it? So let's start with that. First, modular mobile architecture is a software design technique that helps us emphasize and separate the functionality into several functional units ready to be used and reused by other teams and other apps while improving our development speed and improving our code quality. And while that sounds nice in theory, I want to share with you kind of like what has been our process to getting to this place of actually having a modular application. It's been quite some time to be able to get there. The company actually started not as part of PayPal, but it was actually a standalone application, a standalone company. And as we all start with, whenever we start with an idea, we start with a simple thing. We try to usually create an MVP, and we usually don't start too much thinking about what will be the architecture in 3 years, in 5 years, in n number of years, because we just want to get something out the door. So I'm not saying that always, but there are a lot of times when we start a mobile application, we do not start with the mindset of, okay, what will my application be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 1 year? We just want to get something out the door. We just want the people to get the hands on our mobile application and see if it actually is creating an impact, if it's actually providing something to the users that add value to their lives and to their way of going throughout their day. So this is actually the way our company started. Well, not our company, the company that I work on started. So we started as a single module where we started to add a lot of screens for different features, whether it was like for the company focuses on sending money to different countries. So Zoom it was a company, a standalone company that allowed you to send money from I don't know, maybe Italy to Guatemala or the United States to Mexico, and those sort of transactions. So this is kind of like how the actual code started. I just have like general images of how the app looked, and then we're gonna go through all the way towards what we have right now. So it's been around like maybe a 10-year, I don't know, I think it's a little bit around 10 years of evolution of the application, and until getting where we are right now. It doesn't need to take that long, but this is kind of like how the company has been evolving. So we started as a single module. There were several challenges and advantages that provided us. So, given that the team was very small, um, then we wanted to get something out the door very quickly. So the challenges that we faced after doing that kind of like first approach was that the code organization, uh, at first it wasn't done by feature. So knowing where the code was for a specific feature was a little bit complicated because it was all over the place. It was more organized by layers, and well, there are maybe places where that works. I think for us it created a little bit of chaos. Then onboarding new people to a team was really hard because there wasn't a very defined architectural pattern. We had a lot of conflicts while developing because we maybe had like a lot of things in the same storyboard. Like we didn't have kind of like the best practices as start. Like I mentioned, the first idea was just to get something out the door, to have a mobile presence, and to be able to actually give something to the users. Then getting up to speed to getting new members up to speed to conform to standards took a lot of time because, well, they weren't documented. And well, at this time, the build time was really not an issue. It was just like normal because the code base wasn't too big. So all of the applications go through a growth process, and also the team grows um, while the code base also increases. So whenever you start working on code base for a mobile architecture, you have to think in both areas. You have to think in terms of what the business wants, what the engineering effort is going to be, like what kind of engineering sources do you have, and also where in their careers they are at that present moment, because you want to provide opportunities for growth in their career, opportunities of learning. So that those are just things that you need to keep in mind that we always had to take into account throughout this whole process. So okay, after doing that first initial approach, then we started to think like, how can we improve our code base? How can we make it more standard? How can we create something that it's more maintainable, has more tests, that it can actually grow in the future? So we started with something simple. We changed to the from an architecture that was more focused on layers to something more into functional units, and each one of them we followed the Viper as an architectural pattern. So each functional unit had several screens that were implemented in Viper, and well, there are more architectural patterns that were out there at that moment. Like kind of like Viper was a little bit in the hype, and we wanted to just try it out. So that brought also some challenges and some advantages. Now our code was more organized by feature. Then also we had less conflicts with because we were able to organize better who could work in what part. Like maybe I could work on the network part, and one of my team members could work on the UI part, or I can work in a specific feature, and my other team members could work in another specific feature. So we have more isolated changes in terms of like team collaboration. One of the things that was not so good was that Viper adds a lot of boilerplate code, but we were able to find a way to create templates very quickly, so it wasn't kind of like that bad. But given that we were using Viper, the testing was pretty easy. It was quicker to onboard new team members because we have everything very standardized. And well, at this point, it didn't make sense to actually have frameworks or libraries because the team wasn't big enough. The company wasn't there, still not there, where there was an actual need to get to the modular application. But as you know, companies evolve. There are new requirements. There are new problems that we need to solve, and then we came to this part. The question started to be like, okay, PayPal just bought us, then why? How can we use the code that we already built in order to add more value to PayPal? How could we actually integrate what we already have in the mobile application into this new world? So that was kind of like the question, and so we started to work towards that. It wasn't still kind of like a requirement. It was just like, okay, let's imagine what would happen if we would need to integrate this application into this other bigger application. Then we decided that we started to work with frameworks to create more modules that could be reused. So we thought that the only thing that we could reuse in another application was the network layer. So we started to create that. We created our framework for the network layer. And then we kept the UI in the same place. We also kept it in kind of like functional units. We didn't separate every product into a new framework. It just stayed as a whole application. That also provided some challenges and some advantages. First, we kept the code organization by functional units. Then, of course, because we needed to support another framework, another framework, then it took a little bit more time in maintaining, because we now have 2 repos to maintain, but we had the same amount of engineering, and at some point we actually had less engineering, so we had to do more with less. And well, we thought that that was good enough to be able to reuse the network code in another application, but there were some challenges that we hadn't foreseen. So it didn't actually work. But that did help us in have kind of like quicker build times. Our build time wasn't still very huge, because the code base was bigger than before, but it wasn't as big as some of the corporate applications that are out there. So it wasn't that bad. But it did help us to reduce it and to be able to parallelize it. And it also helped us to be prepared to increase the team size. And we were starting to work towards having kind of like the core teams and domain teams that it's very heard of in different applications. So as I mentioned, you have to think of the evolution of the mobile application, not just in terms of the business, but also in terms of the careers of the engineers that you have. So by creating these, having core teams and having domain teams that allow more team members to grow into kind of like leadership positions, or just having more freedom to define some level of the architecture, or what would be the direction that we wanted to take in the different areas. And well, after that, like, okay, as I mentioned, here is where we started to think, like, what would happen if they asked us to actually integrate this functionality that we have as a standalone application inside the other bigger application. So the question was like, okay, can you integrate it to another app? And after a lot of investigation and just trying to figure out what we need to integrate, what it would require to integrate our code to this bigger application, we came to the conclusion that we hadn't done it quite right. And well, unfortunately, we couldn't reuse what we thought that we could reuse in this new application. Like, there were some parts of it, but there were other details that we hadn't taken into account. So we were able to extract part of this network framework, but it wasn't fully used, mostly because of the authentication part. Like, it was we require more information from this new application to be able to actually use it. And well, it was a little bit of challenge, but it came to this diagram. So here's where we actually started to work more using a lot of frameworks. So we came from being a standalone application, being only kind of like 6 or 7 developers in iOS side, for example, to a bigger team that it's kind of like more than 100 engineers. I really don't remember right now like how many engineers, but there are a lot of more engineers that support this application. That's the PayPal application. So in this one, we do have different teams. As I mentioned before, we have teams that focus more on core functionality, like network frameworks or analytics and experimentation frameworks, because you want to have frameworks that are supported by the whole domain teams. You don't want that every domain team recreates the same thing over and over and over and over again. You want that each one could reuse part of the infrastructure and just take advantage and just focus on the problem that you solve. So our problem was, how do we send money? How do we reload phones? We didn't have to worry about what was the navigation infrastructure in terms of like we have to create everything from scratch. The idea is that there's one whole team, one bigger team that focuses on this problem and tries to solve it the best way. Another team that focuses more on how to manage dependencies, because at the end, whenever you start to work with frameworks, one of the problems that you will face is like, how do you manage all of the dependencies? And given that it's kind of like a bigger code base, the build times will be very slow in terms of integration. But in this case, besides the challenge of starting to work with other frameworks, kind of like core frameworks, we also needed to architect our own domain framework. So being in this large organization, we also needed to keep trying to figure out how to organize our code base better so it could grow in the best way possible. And well, in this case, again, we just wanted to get something out the door. So pretty much we repeated kind of like the step 2 inside this whole new application. As you can see, we still kept one only framework, like it would be kind of like one standalone application. We have 2 kind of like functional units that it's kind of like the main products of Zoom. And then we kept having the network layer, the analytics, and the crossword, like kind of like all of the calls to the larger dependencies in the same place. So we had everything in one place. So this also brought us some challenges and some advantages. One of the advantages was that since we started to use core components that were created and from by other teams that were focused on that specific task, then our speed of development actually increased. So yes, having specific teams that create components that could be reused by the whole domain teams, that creates more speed. But that also means that you have the engineering headcount to be able to put it into practice, and also that you have kind of like managers that help manage all of the integration of everything. In this case, by having these kind of like core frameworks and domain frameworks and having a main application that's kind of like the skeleton, that makes it integrating a little bit slow. So the build times could be very, very slow. So you had to be very patient whenever you try to integrate everything to the skeleton app. But if you were working just on the domain framework, so in our domain specific framework, the build time was pretty quick, and you didn't have to worry about what the other teams were doing. By creating this domain team, like it was, we became better prepared to increase the team size, and also we could reuse some standardization among all domain teams. So maybe that was the good part, but we still didn't thought very well through from the start on how this could have been improved. So even though we were working with frameworks, like you have kind of like the core frameworks, the UI frameworks, analytics, and experimentation, within our domain team, we hadn't thought really what would the future hold us, and how can we architect our app better to support more use cases. Like, for example, right now we were on the challenge that we needed to support the standalone application that was already on the App Store. Users are still using that, but we are now have to also support this new code base, and the engineering headcount hasn't increased. So we have more code, more places that we need to focus on, but we don't have more resources. So we have to start to think like, how can we reduce the amount of code that we support, because the team is not going to grow, and what is the path forward in order to support the business needs, the engineering challenges, and well, in general, just keep the code base as clean as possible, as testable as possible, and to be able to reuse components. So now we came here towards our next stop. Our next stop is having multiple frameworks. So within our domain, we started to create multiple frameworks. So we tried to think more of what are the actual products that could be integrated into maybe our standalone application, or maybe at some point we wanted to reuse somewhere else. Like we don't always have all the answers in terms of where the business is going, but we could start to think of those questions like, okay, if the company wanted to move in one direction, what would that require? If the company wants to stop doing some kind of a product, what would that require? How would that impact our code base? So that those were kind of like the questions that we started to ask ourselves, and we came up with this solution. So we said, okay, we need to have kind of like a send money framework. That's one of the main products of the company. And then with that, we created a framework that contains multiple screens. We moved from Viper to MVVM. So we don't no longer have all of the boilerplate code, and since at that point also we started to hear more about using Swift UI or using Combine or having kind of like a more reactive approach. And we thought like, okay, let's go with MVVM. We started to create the send money framework, and then we created the reload framework. Maybe that's another main product that Zoom has. And then, okay, we have those two frameworks. Those two frameworks are going to be kind of like that we want to implement it in such a way that they can be standalone frameworks. And for that, we needed to share the network layer, because we didn't want to create the network layer for the send money framework and create the network layer for the reload framework. So we decided to create another framework specific for network. So now we have we use the core frameworks around the company that help us kind of like, okay, if you have the UI framework, if you want to do some rebranding, then that's pretty, it's not like easy, super easy, that very, very quick, but it's quicker than if each one of the teams focuses on creating all of the components to have a standard UI. So the UI, if you are able to create a UI framework that allows you to rebrand, do some facelifts of the apps more quickly, that if you allow each domain team to manage the UI by themselves. So okay, you have the UI frameworks. We reuse the network frameworks from the company, so you already have kind of like things that could be reused throughout the domain teams, but still, we still have a layer of network that's specific to our domain, and we needed to add some information to be able to actually make the calls. And okay, so we still have to create that framework for ourselves, and that needed to be able to be reused in the different frameworks that we created in terms of functional units, like products that the company had. So this is kind of like the idea that we started. And if you kind of like pay real attention, it's pretty much like we were returning to the phase 3 that I mentioned before. So let me just go back a little bit. There one is a term. So we have kind of like the same thing. You have the send money with the scripts implemented in Viper. You have the riddle with the scripts implemented in Viper. I didn't add everything like that you have here in terms of experimentation, crash logging, I don't know, maybe some dependency injection. Like, I don't know, there are a lot of things that we need to handle inside app. But if you actually pay attention, it's the same idea. We started with the idea that the network framework could be reused in different places, and but here we still kept it in the same app, so it didn't maybe make too much sense. But now we have two frameworks that could actually use the network layer, and it's pretty much kind of like the same architecture as before, but in a bigger scope and using frameworks, like having a more modular approach. So in this case, like each framework can be added to other standalone apps. In a specific, our idea was our own standalone app to reduce the code that we needed to support. As I mentioned, the team didn't kind of like grew. It actually became a little bit smaller in some moments. But this allows us to create opportunities for team members to grow on their career, like be able to lead projects, be able to define how do we want to set up everything, just have a little bit more ownership. The network frameworks could be reusing in another place, like I don't know, maybe now we want to create a new product and we need the same infrastructure in terms of networking for Zoom, so we could reuse that. We have very granular features that are very, very specific. And okay, so let's say I just want to have the send money part, then I could actually use that. Then if I want the reload part, I could actually use that. I just want the network part, then I could reuse that. And well, since that's where we were going, then kind of like the end game would be we now have, as like we are part of a bigger app, but we're still a domain team with a specific business use case. So we have now multiple frameworks that we support. We use the core frameworks of the bigger application. And we also created a networking framework for use. At the end, the company will keep evolving. The requirements will keep changing. But there are some things that we did learn from all of these kind of like process, from being a single application to being just a module inside a bigger application, and being required to support another standalone with the same code base. I think it has come kind of like a long way. Maybe there are some steps that we could have avoided, or some steps that could have been quicker if we had thought better where we were going. But I think sometimes it's easier said than done. Like sometimes it's easier to look back and say, okay, we could have done this better by thinking more through what were the goals of the company, or where the company was going, where in the engineering side we could actually get. And well, if this is kind of like the summary, like at the beginning, our kind of like our worry was kind of like the quantity of code. The comeback, kind of like the second phase, was our main challenge was, hey, how can we make our code more testable? On the third phase, our worry was more, okay, how can I structure the code that could be easily reused and ported to another application. So we were more focused and worried about structure and how to isolate code. So for example, the networking layer that we extracted, we were worried, okay, like, could that actually be a component that we could use or can be changed? Then the next phase was, okay, can we actually reuse the code, or did we do the work right, or didn't make it? And as I mentioned, we didn't quite have it right that first time. And then came would be kind of like the modularisation. So I kind of like wanted to share a little bit about the lessons learned. Like if you're going through this path of having a code base that it's more kind of like a monolith, and well, maybe not a monolith, but you started with a code base that it's where everything is in the same place, in the same project, then and you want to go towards modularization, you first start to ask some questions to yourself and to your engineering team, like, okay, where is your product actually going? Like, will they want to integrate it to another application? Will you want to create other apps? What kind of features or what kind of layers will you actually need? Like, like always, when you try to organize code, is you have kind of like two options. You can organize it by feature, or you can organize it by layers. So what is important to your company, to your product? As you saw on my diagram as here, we have both parts. We want to have frameworks that were very granular and very specific. Okay, this is the product of Send Money. This can be a standalone module. You can have everything there that you need to actually send money, and that could actually be reused in our single application. So is that something that you want, or is just some specific layers that you will need to reuse? So for example, the network layer, you just want to have this because you want to have different kind of like look and feels and UIs, and you want to allow people to integrate with your network very easily, and then just let them create the UI that they want. Is that kind of like where the product is going? You can have some frameworks that are very generic, and that they can actually be very helpful to help your domain teams write code quicker. For example, the frameworks that I have actually seen that are very useful are the UI framework. Like I mentioned, the UI framework helps a lot in terms of creating components that can be reused throughout all of your domain teams. So each one of us do not have to repeat the templates and the themes. And if you want to change kind of like, okay, now I don't want my components to look like this, then you just go to one framework, change it there, and then the other domain teams, by just changing the version of your framework, you could actually get the good parts of those changes. Or maybe you just need to change some properties on the domain team. So the change of UI becomes very quick compared to what it used to be, or what actually took us in the single app application. Like having a change there, given that we didn't start with UI framework, was kind of like very slow. We had to go through all of our screens and change either the color or the size, I don't know, the text. Like there are some changes that product sometimes requires for us. And if you do not have that UI framework, it will require a lot of time, even more if you have a lot of screens and it's just one team working on it. So I think the UI framework is something very valuable that helps you increase development. The network framework also helps us a lot in terms of like structuring how do we need to make the calls, and if there's some specific information that can be comprised in one specific module. But then on your domain teams, then we can continue with the questions that I think are important to ask ourselves. Like, What are the main features that can work independently? Do you think that will be something that the company will require in the future, or is it just like something that I want to experiment? Then what is the growth the company expects to have in terms of engineering? Like, are we actually going to have more headcounts, more like develop more engineers that are able to work on this product, or are we going to have the same at least? Then, like I mentioned, the UI frameworks can reduce exponentially the amount of time it will take you to do a rebranding. Network frameworks, or making sure the code base can be extracted to frameworks will save you a lot of time. And one crucial idea is that you do not need to optimize too early. Like if you're in the early stages of your mobile application, thinking of a modular mobile application maybe doesn't make sense because you don't know if it will actually work, or where, or how the users will actually use it, and if this is where the product is going. So I do suggest that you don't use kind of like a modular applications from the start. It is more kind of like when the product is a little bit more mature. And but you can start by making sure that whenever you write the code, it's very well separated, so you make your work easier when this time comes, if it comes to that. So why should we actually use frameworks? Well, frameworks can be built separately. That will reduce the build time, and well, that makes more happier developers. For example, if I had to work in the skeleton app all the time, it would drive me nuts. It would be I don't know, very very slow. I would be very frustrated most of the time. So also part of whenever you create an architecture, when you structure all of your frameworks, you want to give the best developer experience. It isn't just about giving product what they want or having faster release times. It's also about keeping your developers happy to work in your company, and also give them opportunities for growth in terms of their career and leading new initiatives. So in that note, domain teams can have the freedom to implement things according to the standards they decide within the team. So even though there are many domain teams, each one of us can have some certain freedom to work like however we decide to work. At the end, the team is made by people, and we need to learn to work together. So we come from different backgrounds, and we can take advantage of those different backgrounds within our domain team. Then adopting new technology and improving UI can be done quicker. So, for example, we could actually, if we decide to use Swift UI, then it would be a little bit quicker because the components are in just one place, and we then just start to use it. Still, that means that we need to do some changes in our code base, but there is already someone who started working on this change. We have better code encapsulation. Code gets to be reusable, so we now do not have to support two places, the same functionality in two places. So we have the single application and this new big application. We could reduce the code and just save us some time on maintenance. Maintenance is also very important. You need to make sure that all of the dependencies are up to date. Then, I don't know, solving bugs. There are always some bugs that appear, and imagine if you need to solve it in two different places over and over, and if both places have a different architecture or anything, then it increases the time. And maybe what happens if one of your team members that has been for quite some time goes, then you lose that kind of like big chunk of learnings that you already have from the old code base. You can have kind of like faster build times, and will increase your code coverage. And well, I think that's what I wanted to share. I wanted to share more kind of like the path that has taken us into modules, like creating actual models and frameworks, and what have been our challenges along the way. it's more kind of like lessons learned from our experience, and I didn't want to focus on only on kind of like the theory part. So this is kind of like what I wanted to share. So this has been our journey into frameworks to scale and speed development. And I don't know if you have any questions or anything.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cecilia. Actually, yes, the chat is also on talk, by the way. The chat has some questions for you, so I'm gonna read a couple of them. There's a first one that asks, "How big are teams for apps like these?" He wonders.
Yeah, well, when we started as a, kind of like as a standalone application and standalone company, like just the company Zoom per se, before being bought by PayPal, we were kind of like 6 iOS engineers, maybe 6 Android engineers, and then you have the product managers and the engineering manager, and then maybe I don't know, the team was and the QA team. So maybe at the end, the mobile team, we were kind of like 18 people or 19 people between engineering managers, product managers, QAs, and the native mobile teams between Android and iOS. Now, when we kind of like were bought by PayPal, and then we became part of a bigger team, then it's more than 100 iOS engineers, for example. Like they're just iOS engineers. There are like more than 100 engineers, and then you need to count also the Android teams, and then the product managers, and then the engineering managers, and it becomes a little bit bigger. So also managing all of these team members in the way we started working on the single application was not sustainable. Like you cannot make sure everyone works in the same standard. Like you have to give some kind of like freedom on how they work. And yeah, that's the answer.
Well, we actually have another question about what kind of approach do you use for dependency injection? Like some open source software library like Swinject or Deep, or did you write your own solution?
Yeah, it's more the solution. Like, okay, you have the domain teams. Inside the domain team, we do not use any dependency injection library. We can like just use constructors, dependency injections through constructors, and then you have the way you manage dependencies within the kind of like the skeleton app and our domain teams, and that's more a solution implemented internally. So no, we do not use libraries. I'm still curious about them. Like I have wanted to use Deep for quite some time just to test it, but I haven't been able to do it.
Thank you very much. There's another question. No, but it seems like it has been answered in the talk. I actually also had a couple questions, but you broke them down in your speech perfectly. You're being very clear. So, thank you very much, Cecilia, for your speech. It was really lovely to have you here, and it's been very interesting. So, hope to see you next soon, and thank you again.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for allowing me this space to share.
Just
And
I want
nice
to remind. Thank you very much. I want to remind all the people that are watching us that Swift Heroes is the main event of Swift Heroes is gonna be held the 4th and 5th of May, and here in Turin. So just save the date and be sure not to miss that at all. It's gonna be awesome, and we're gonna have lots of speakers, and it's gonna be very, like, I'm actually very excited to be there and to present there and be able to be part of this whole event. So thank you very much for